You're listening to the Angry Marks Podcast Network.
He has revolutionized professional wrestling with his words and his wit. And even more important, Zane Paisley, he is in the Knights of the Squared Circle Hall of Fame.
Oh, that is true.
He is the incomparable Bill Apter.
Well, thank
Mr.
you.
Apter?
And what an honor it is to be on the Undisputed Wrestling Show. There's no dispute here. This is undisputed. And it's also a pleasure to be in the Hall of Fame.
You know what, Bill? A couple of years back, in my disgust for pro wrestling halls of fame, got frustrated with the politics that were involved in naming some of these people in the halls of fame, that I decided to create my own hall of fame, and got my buddy Zane here and several other people in the Facebook group Pro Wrestling Obsession.
By the way, Zane, nice beard.
Well, thank you, sir. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So we decided to have our own Hall of Fame, and we diligently work without politics. And Bill, you are legendary status in our Hall of Fame for your career and what you've done in the business. So,
well, thank you. Like I said, I'm absolutely flattered by that. It's going on 47 years in the pro wrestling sports entertainment business, and when a lot of guys my age are sitting around going, hey, I used to be. Hell, I'm just getting started. I'm even on the WWE Network. So
that's right, you are.
Yeah.
You know, Bill, before we get to into your career and everything, I want to very quickly talk about the passing of Ox Baker. For those who do not know, Ox passed away this week at the age of 80 due to kidney failure. Speaking for myself, when as a little prophet growing up, I grew up watching Ox Baker and Dick the Bruiser's WWA, and he was the most imposing, intimidating villain growing up to watch, and he was one of the main reasons I got hooked on wrestling, and I'm now in the almost year 45 of watching wrestling myself, and if it wasn't for Ox Baker, there's no doubt in my mind I would not be sitting here talking to Mr. Apter right now. Bill, what's your favorite memories and thoughts of Ox Baker?
Oh, one of the best bad guys, rule breakers that the business ever saw, but underneath that, heart of a pussycat, one of the sweetest people I've ever met in my life. Just a really good guy, and he had that real old school villain thing going for him, because I would see him at a lot of the conventions in the last few years, and I could see the kids were, even though he tried to act like he wasn't scary, kids were even afraid to go over to him just because he looked so intimidating. And, people always wanted us to do in the magazines I worked for back then, Ox Baker versus Stan Stasiak, who's got the best heart punch. Mm-hmm. But we never figured it out.
A lot of people see that video on YouTube and they just don't understand the magnitude of what it was like back then in Ox's days wrestling, and causing that
riot. Which video are we talking about?
Right, Bill?
Which video are we talking about?
The one where he started the riot, where he continuously where he continuously was pounding the heart punch. I can't even remember the opponent now, but that was a completely different era of wrestling, and the bad guys back then had to worry for their lives getting out of some of these arenas.
Oh, sure. The one when I was a kid, and I used to hang outside arenas in Queens, New York, where I grew up. I mean, the bad guys, even some of the good guys, are so scary when you meet them coming out of the arena, which they didn't want to sign autographs or something like that. And Ox Baker, I knew whenever I saw him and I saw fans waiting outside the arena for autographs during my career, nobody really wanted to approach him because people were genuinely afraid of him.
Well, definitely an underrated wrestling character in the world. I'm going to miss him. Unfortunately, I don't think he'll ever see the light of day in the WWE Hall of Fame, which is too bad. But I'm going to miss him.
We don't know that. I mean, sometimes they put in people who I never thought, when they put in Bill Watts and Vern Gagne, I never thought they would put them in. So you don't know. If there's a reason to put them in for some reason, then they'll put them in.
For those listeners who aren't familiar with your career, Bill, how did you get started, number one, enjoying this wacky world of professional wrestling, then number two, writing for it?
How did I get started? I had cards printed up. No, That's not how I got started. Okay. I went to Vista Print and got 500 business cards at Bill Apter, writer. No, this goes back to when I was growing up. I was a big wrestling fan. I even did my own little fan club bulletin that I'd type, before computers, where I'd type the same 10 pages or so 10 times and pass them out to my friends in school, all wrestling news that I saw on TV. And then I also wanted to be an entertainer, and I wanted to be a broadcaster. So I went to the New York School of Announcing and Speech back in the 60s just to learn how to say things correctly, et cetera, even though I felt like I wanted to go to school for that. And after that, I bought time on a local New York radio station. It was an hour's time, was like $35 back then. And I went and started interviewing. I told celebrities and their agents, I'd call them and tell them I have a radio show in New York. And they would let me interview their talents when they came to theaters in the area. And at one point, I got some tickets to a pro wrestling show down at Sunnyside Garden, Queens, New York. And I went down and I interviewed this guy named Bruno Sammartino that I was very familiar with, Chief Jay Strongbow and Victor Rivera. And I taped them and ran them on my radio show and got a really good reaction. So we head now to late 1969, early 1970. And I was a fan of the wrestling magazines back in the 60s, too, that were put out by Stanley Weston. It was Wrestling Review. And I did some more interviews for my radio show, and I typed up transcripts of them and had my dad shoot pictures of me interviewing the wrestlers, and I sent it to Stanley Weston. And I got a letter back. There was no email back then. I got a letter back about a week later. How do you get into the dressing rooms? And how did you do this? And I sent him back a letter and told him about the radio show. So he wanted to meet with me. And we met for lunch one day in New York City. And he asked me if I could write. And I said, not really. I've never really written, just a fan club bulletin and stuff. I said, I know how to interview people, and I can take pictures with the funky Instamatic camera. So he offered me a job in the office, which was in his home, 3 days a week at $25 a day, filing photos in his basement, all the wrestling photos for the magazines. At that time, he was doing Inside Wrestling and The Wrestler and a bunch of boxing magazines. So I had told him, he said, when you shoot pictures, where do you get the film process? I said, I developed the film myself. He had a darkroom in his home. So I started doing that when freelancers would send stuff in. I started doing that. So he looked at the camera I had, and he bought me a Nikon. And then he looked at some of the writing I had just done that he asked me to do, and it was horrible. It's absolutely horrible. He said to me, I don't hear your voice in this writing. You're trying to be grammatically correct, and it's not you. He says, I want you to write the way you talk. So I started writing columns, because I talk fast, and I started writing columns in fast talk, and he liked those. And little by little, that put the key in the ignition to kickstart my career. And then in probably 1971 or the end of 70, he got a call from Al Costello, one of the fabulous Kangaroos, that a big title change was going to happen in Detroit with them, with the Kangaroos. And at that point, Roy Heffernan had left the Kangaroos. It was Don Kent and Al Costello, and Mr. Weston sent me to cover the matches and shoot the pictures. And I started making a name for myself with the guys. He says, this guy can get you in the magazine, Costello would tell them. And little by little, I started going to different territories, and I knew when to talk and when to listen. And it just became a thing where the guys let me in because I wasn't looking to expose anything. I was polite. I was dressed with a shirt and tie and a sport jacket, and I looked like a real reporter, etc. So that's how it all got started.
When you were a little boy, Bill, who were the guys that you watched that put that spark into you in the first place? I mean, for me, it was Dick the Bruiser.
I wanted to be a wrestler. I wanted to be a wrestler in the worst way. I wanted to be Nature Boy Buddy Rogers.
Mm-hmm.
I was walking around the neighborhood talking like this, telling everybody I'm the Nature Boy, strutting around the block. Guys would beat the hell out of me, and I'd go back the next night. Get beat up again. Absolutely loved it.